The colony on Kepler 186f, which its inhabitants had affectionately named Haven, was a testament to human hope. Buildings Hindi, hi Kurenus Hindi, hi Durenus Hindi, hi Halant Enus Hindi, hi Varenus, ed like gentle hills, blending with the native flora of rust-red grasses and trees that spiraled towards a sky often painted with twin sunsets. Community gardens bloomed with earth-native vegetables alongside newly cultivated local plants, their scents mingling in the recycled air of the settlement domes. At the heart of New Alexandria, the largest dome, stood the Remembrance Plaza, a place of quiet reflection and vibrant celebration. Its central monument, a living sculpture of interwoven bioluminescent vines that pulsed with a soft, comforting light, each tendril representing a generation that had strived for this new beginning. Elara, Haven's chief archivist and cultural historian, often said the plaza was the soul of their colony. It held their memories, their art, their shared dreams. The arrival of the Xyler was initially an event of cautious curiosity. Their ships, perfectly symmetrical obsidian blades, sliced through the atmosphere with unnerving silence, settling in precise formations around the domes. The Xyler themselves were tall, insectoid beings with multiple limbs, their carapaces a dull gray, their multifaceted eyes betraying no discernible emotion. They communicated through synthesized translators, their voices flat, devoid of inflection. They announced they were the Xyler Collective, and their purpose was harmonization. Humanity, they stated with cold logic, was a species prone to emotional imbalance, its societal structures inherently unstable. For the greater good of galactic order, human populations required guidance, and where necessary, pacification to curb their volatile tendencies. Haven was to be their first full-scale harmonization project. The Xyler saw human emotions as system errors, bugs in the code of sentient life. Grief, joy, love, anger, these were merely chaotic signals that disrupted efficient societal function. Their initial attempts at harmonization involved imposing rigid schedules, censoring artistic expression they deemed too stimulating, and dismantling social gatherings. The colonists resisted passively at first, confused and insulted. The Xyler, in their hyper-rational view, interpreted this noncompliance as further evidence of humanity's flawed nature. Commander Vrel, the Xyler overseeing the Kepler 186f operation, consulted its vast databanks. The data indicated that disrupting a lesser species' cultural touchstones often led to a swift breakdown of morale, followed by compliance. Public displays of grief were recorded as indicators of societal fracturing, a prelude to surrender. Vrel issued the order. Commence Phase 2. Cultural deconstruction. Target primary emotional conduits. The Xyler drones, sleek and silent, descended upon the Remembrance Plaza first. Elara watched from the window of the archives building, her heart a cold stone in her chest. The drones methodically began to dismantle the living sculpture, its bioluminescent vines dimming as they were severed. They moved on to the community art installations, the children's brightly painted murals, the small memorials dedicated to pioneers lost in Haven's early, harsher years. Each act of destruction was precise, efficient, and utterly devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. Cries of anguish echoed through the dome. People rushed out, some pleading, some yelling, but the Xyler patrols, impassive and armed, kept them back. Elara saw old Joram, who had carved the story of their journey to Haven on wooden panels around the plaza, fall to his knees, a keening sound tearing from his throat as his life's work was reduced to splinters. She saw young Lyra, who had painted a vibrant mural of Kepler 186f's unique wildlife, sobbing into her mother's shoulder as a Xyler drone meticulously sandblasted it into oblivion. This was what the Xyler expected: despair, helplessness, the fracturing of spirit. Commander Vrel observed the data feeds. Increased vocalizations of distress, elevated heart rates, congregation in small, disorganized groups, all aligning with predicted models for societal collapse. But then, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a change in the quality of the silence that fell after the initial wave of cries. A silence that was not empty, but heavy, like the air before a storm. The grief was still there, raw and bleeding, but it began to curdle into something else. Marcus, a quiet engineer who had lost his wife during a blight that struck their hydroponic farms 2 years prior, a loss he had borne with a quiet, aching sorrow, stood watching the Xyler burn a collection of books salvaged from old Earth, their pages containing poetry and stories that had comforted him. The Xyler saw this as a logical step: destroy the vessels of past emotional contagion. As the flames consumed the irreplaceable texts, something in Marcus didn't just break, it reforged. His grief for his wife, for his lost home of Earth, for his dying culture on Haven, coalesced into a single, cold point of fury. He wasn't the only one. Across the colony, the shared trauma was not leading to individual breakdown, but to a terrifying, unspoken consensus. The Xyler had intended to excise their emotions, to show them the futility of such messy things. Instead, they had concentrated their pain into a singular, powerful fuel. The first act of active resistance was small, almost overlooked by the Xyler. A maintenance drone sent to disable the dome's primary atmospheric recycler was found with its optical sensors meticulously painted over with a thick, black resin, a substance usually used for sealing cracks in walkways. Then, a Xyler patrol found their path blocked by a barricade of overturned transport carts and stacked hydroponic trays, not a formidable obstacle, but an inconvenient one, erected with defiant symbolism. Commander Vrel noted these as minor acts of vandalism, statistically insignificant. Its models still predicted imminent compliance. But the vandalism escalated. Xyler drones began to suffer critical malfunctions, not explosions, but precise, debilitating sabotage. A microscopic abrasive powder, painstakingly collected from a local geological formation, found its way into their delicate joint mechanisms. Communication arrays were subtly mistuned, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to garble vital data transmissions. The humans, it seemed, were using their intimate knowledge of their own colony, their own tools, their own environment, in ways the Xyler hadn't anticipated. They were not fighting like a conventional army. They were fighting like a body rejecting a virus, with every cell playing a part. Lara, the archivist, became an intelligence hub. Her knowledge of the colony's layout, its forgotten access tunnels, its resource caches, was now a weapon. She coordinated small groups, their faces grim, their eyes burning with a shared, cold light. They moved like ghosts through their own home, their grief a shield against fear. They weren't trying to win a war in the Xyler sense. They were exacting a price for every memory destroyed, for every spirit wounded. It was a resistance born of spiteful resilience. If the Xyler wanted to erase their culture, their feelings, then these humans would make them understand the true cost of that erasure. A Xyler scientific unit, tasked with analyzing a children's playground, deemed an illogical allocation of resources for unproductive juvenile activity. Before its scheduled demolition, was ambushed, not with energy weapons, but with a sudden, localized sonic pulse generated by repurposed terraforming equipment, calibrated to a frequency that caused intense disorientation in Xyler neurology. The humans who triggered it were parents, their faces streaked with tears and grime, their hands shaking, but their actions precise. They didn't kill the Xyler. They disabled them, stripped their equipment, and vanished. Commander Vrel was perplexed. The resistance was not logical. It was inefficient. The humans were taking risks that offered no strategic long-term advantage according to Xyler combat doctrine. They were fighting with an intensity that seemed to draw upon some unseen wellspring of energy. When Xyler patrols cornered small groups of human resistors, the humans fought with a ferocity that was terrifying. They didn't surrender when the odds were impossible. They fought to the last, their cries not of fear, but of defiance, sometimes even a kind of bitter, tearful laughter that chilled the Xyler observers. They were turning their grief into a weapon of focused rage. The breaking point for Commander Vrel came during the attempted demolition of the main dome's historical data core, located beneath the ruins of the Remembrance Plaza. The Xyler believed securing this core would give them access to all of humanity's recorded emotional vulnerabilities. A heavily armed Xyler unit breached the subterranean levels. They were met not by a few desperate fighters, but by a coordinated defense. Marcus, the quiet engineer, was there, his face a mask of cold fury. He had jury-rigged mining charges, not to cause massive explosions, but to trigger localized cave-ins, to seal corridors, to turn the Xyler's methodical advance into a confusing, lethal trap. One Xyler unit, designated Unit 734, managed to bypass a collapsing tunnel and found itself in a small, reinforced chamber. Inside were 3 humans, 2 men and a woman, armed with scavenged Xyler energy rifles. They were clearly outmatched. Unit 734's translator blared, "Surrender. Your resistance is illogical. You cannot succeed." The woman, her face pale but her eyes blazing, spat back, "We already have." Then all 3 of them opened fire, not primarily at Unit 734, but at the support struts of the chamber itself, and at a series of large, volatile energy cells they had apparently dragged into the room. Unit 734's threat assessment algorithm screamed. This was not tactical. This was something else. The humans were not trying to survive. They were trying to ensure the data core, their history, their collective soul, would not fall into Xyler hands, even if it meant their own annihilation. The resulting explosion was contained by the bedrock, but the shockwave was felt throughout the Xyler command structure. The data core was lost, and with it, the entire Xyler unit. Commander Vrel analyzed the event. The humans had willingly sacrificed themselves, taking Xyler assets with them to protect information, to protect memories, to act on an emotional imperative that overrode self-preservation. This was not in its predictive models. This was not logical. This was terrifying. The concept of a species that could weaponize its sorrow, that could turn the deepest pain into an unbreakable, self-destructive, yet devastatingly effective shield and sword, was profoundly alien to the Xyler Collective's understanding of the universe. Grief was supposed to weaken, to break. For these humans, it was a forge. Commander Vrel made a decision that went against its core programming of mission completion. It initiated a full retreat. The cost of harmonizing this single, small colony was becoming astronomically, illogically high. The casualty reports, the equipment losses, the sheer unpredictability of the human response, it was unsustainable. As the Obsidian ships ascended, leaving behind a scarred but unbowed haven, the Xyler Collective's perception of humanity underwent a seismic shift. The data from Kepler 186f was analyzed, reanalyzed, and finally disseminated with a new, chilling classification. Humans were not merely emotionally unstable. Their emotions, particularly their grief, were a latent psychic force, an unpredictable variable capable of generating tactical and strategic outcomes that defied all rational calculation. The Xyler Collective quarantined the entire sector containing Earth and its colonies. A new directive was issued throughout their vast network, a warning that would echo in their silent, logical halls for eons. Species designation, human, threat profile, unpredictable, emotional catalyst, grief, recommendation, avoid provocation, do not inflict widespread sorrow. Their sorrow breeds unstoppable storms. Their grief is not a weakness, it is their most terrible strength. On Haven, amongst the ruins of their cultural heart, the survivors began to rebuild. Elara stood where the living sculpture had once pulsed, now a crater. The grief was a vast, aching ocean within her, but it was not the grief of defeat. It was the grief of sacrifice, of resilience, of a love for what was lost so fierce it had stared down an empire. They had paid a terrible price, but they had shown the galaxy, and themselves, what it truly meant to be human. Their sorrow was indeed a storm, and it had swept away those who had underestimated its power.